And this is where stuff starts coming together or falling apart depending on who you ask. Hey y'all, welcome and or welcome back to my channel. My name is Janae, if you didn't know, and today's video is another true crime episode. So if you're ready, let's go. Alright y'all, so today's video is the second video of Mystery Week. And before we get into the video today, I'm gonna just ask y'all to subscribe. Because I don't never say subscribe in the beginning, but I feel like that's like standard. I feel like you should say that. Should we be saying that? I feel like we should be saying that. And I don't really think I have a lot to say before this video starts. Let's just go ahead and get into the video. So Helen Golay was born in 1931 in Texas, and she didn't have the best upbringing at all. She was moved from foster family to foster family, orphanage to orphanage, house to house, family to family. Like, she did not have a very stable household at all when she was growing up. And because of this, after she graduated high school, Helen decided to just peace out to Texas, and she moved to California. And in California, she had made a completely different life for herself. It was here that she met and married a dentist, had 3 kids, and she was actually living a good life. And eventually she ended up getting into real estate. She first started off as a realtor, but then she would transition into investing, and she was doing really well. She actually ended up having multiple investment properties, and they was bringing her in a lot of money. She would end up living in a $1.5 million home, driving a Mercedes SUV, like living the life. She ended up getting divorced from her husband, but she still maintained this high lifestyle. She was that girl. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about Olga Ruderschmidt. She was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1934, and y'all know World War II started in 1939, so she was only like 4 or 5 years old when the war started. And during the war, her house was actually bombed, and during this bombing, it kind of like messed up her right hand, so she was like traumatized from an early age. And in 1956, when she was 22 years old, she would leave Hungary and come over to the United States, and she settled in California. And by 1970, she was married, living in LA, owned a coffee shop with her husband, had a couple kids. I think she had kids, I don't know. But eventually they ended up getting divorced. So now that y'all got their brief little backstory, Helen and Olga ended up meeting in California after both of them were divorced. It's not clear when or how, but it is known that they were both divorced by the time that they met. And they took a liking to each other. They became friends really quickly. Now, I don't know whose idea it was, Helen or Olga's, but the two of them would end up getting into some charity work. And the charity work that they did was helping homeless people. So there was this church called the Hollywood Presbyterian, and they had a homeless outreach program where they would serve meals and like provide the homeless with certain different things. And it was through the Homeless Presbyterian Outreach Program that Helen and Olga met a man named Paul Vadas. And he was also from Hungary, and he too had left Hungary, came to the United States, married, had kids, the whole nine. But his wife ended up passing away, and once she passed away, he became estranged from his children, and he started drinking a lot. And this led him to, you know, the situation that he was in, where he didn't have a place to stay. He didn't really have too much family to support him, and he was struggling with his drinking. And every now and again he would go to the church to, you know, get a free meal, you know, just to get some of his needs met. And so when he met Helen and Olga, the two of them actually offered him something that was really hard to refuse. They offered him free housing and free groceries. They pretty much just wanted to help him meet his basic needs until he was able to get on his feet. They really just took care of Paul and made sure he had food and shelter for about 2 years, until November 8th, 1999, when Paul would be found dead in an alley from an apparent hit and run accident. Now, initially when he was found, he was classified as a John Doe because he didn't have any identification on him. And for a couple weeks, he remained a John Doe until Olga ended up filing a missing persons report. And based off of the description that she gave, it was determined that the man in the alley was indeed 73-year-old Paul Vadas. But even though he was now identified, there were no leads as to who the driver was in this hit and run accident. And so it would end up staying that way for about the next 6 years. So now that it had been confirmed that Paul had passed away, Helen and Olga wanted to find a new person to sponsor. And in the summer of 2002, they will find that person, who was Kenneth McDaniel. He was 50 years old at the time, and he was another homeless man who had drifted away from his family after high school and kind of got lost in the streets, potentially due to mental illness. And so Helen and Olga gave him the same proposition that they gave Paul, where they would take care of him, they would pay his rent, they would provide him with food, and all the things that they did for Paul, they wanted to now do for Kenneth. He accepted, and for the next 3 years, Helen and Olga held up their end of the bargain. They paid his rent, got him groceries, and took care of all his basic needs until June 22nd, 2005, when in an alley off Westwood Boulevard in Los Angeles, the body of Kenneth McDaniel was found, run over, and deceased due to an apparent hit and run. But this time, Kenneth actually had ID on him, so he was able to be identified right away. So because he was listed as transient and didn't have any family, Helen will end up claiming his body and getting him cremated. And this is where stuff starts coming together or falling apart depending on who you ask. So in Kenneth's death, Helen and Olga filed an insurance claim to collect on life insurance that Kenneth had. Now, the insurance company doing their job, they didn't want to pay out because stuff was kind of looking a little fishy. I don't know what they saw or why they decided like, let's look into this a little bit further, but they did. And so they hired a private investigator to kind of just like see what was up, see what the deal was with Helen and Olga. So this private investigator is looking at the insurance policies, and he's seeing a bunch of inconsistencies. First, is saying that Kenneth lived here, he lived there, Helga is his fiance, this other one is his cousin. Like, it was just a bunch of like inconsistencies. And so he went to go find Helen and Olga, and when he went to talk to them about the inconsistencies on the paperwork, they was like, nah bro, we don't want to talk. So they decided not to talk to him, but the private investigator wasn't done yet. He decided to go to the police station to talk to the detectives who were on Kenneth's case, because he just felt like something was fishy. And as they were going through these life insurance policies, they realized that Helen and Olga had 2 life insurance policies taken out that totaled $1 million to be paid out between the 2 of them, but neither one of them were related to Kenneth. And so they were kind of like, okay, so maybe we got some insurance fraud going on here. And so as these detectives are talking, another detective is kind of walking by. He kind of eavesdropping, but not really trying to eavesdrop, but he hears some stuff that's like, oh my God, this is crazy. So this detective that's overhearing this conversation is like, hold on, I got a case like that. I had a case like that about 6 years ago. Let me go dig in my archives and pull it up. So once he pulls up the files for this case that he had 6 years ago, he realizes that 2 women named Helen and Olga came into the police station to get reports of this case that he was on. And the case that he was on was Paul Vados's case. So they start digging a little bit deeper, and they realized that Paul had numerous life insurance policies out on him to be paid out to Helen and Olga. So now they knew that they had to investigate, because this went way deeper than they even imagined. So they started doing surveillance on Helen and Olga and investigating a little bit more, and they find out that between the 2 men, Paul and Kenneth, Helen and Olga had applied for 8 life insurance policies on Paul, ended up getting 7, and they applied for 17 life insurance policies against Kenneth, but ended up getting 13. So eventually they ended up gathering enough information to arrest the 2, but not on the murders. They ended up arresting them on mail fraud on May 19, 2006. And they got warrants to search their homes. And during the searches of their homes, they found a multitude of evidence. They found that they had 8 rubber stamps with like signatures on them. So it looked like they had the men sign for one insurance policy, took that signature, got a stamp, got a stamp made of that signature, and was able to get the other multiple insurance policies from them stamping these names. And one of those stamps actually had Kenneth's signature on it. So yeah. They also got the lady's phone records, and it was through those that they found out that Helen actually called a tow company on the night that Kenneth was found in the alley. She called about an hour prior to him being found, and she said that she needed a car towed, and they ended up finding this car and was able to collect evidence from it. So even though the car, I think, had been fixed and resold, the like Carfax, I don't know if it's called it was called the Carfax, I don't know if that's what they said, but pretty much the Carfax said that it did sustain front end damage. And on the underside of the car, they was able to collect a sample of blood, and that blood was determined to be that of Kenneth McDaniels. And so with all of this evidence piled up, on July 31st, 2006, The ladies were both charged with 2 counts of murder and the special circumstances of murder for financial gain, which pretty much made them eligible for the death penalty. And both of them ended up pleading not guilty, so they went to trial. And during this trial, it was stated that these two, Paul and Kenneth, wasn't the only victims or potential victims, okay? So in 2000, there was a man named Fred Downey who had died from being hit by a car, but it was ruled accidental, and he was living at Helen's home at the time of his death. So it's thought that he might be a victim of Helen and Olga's, but it's unclear, especially since his death was ruled accidental, and I don't think they found enough evidence to convict them of his death. And after Fred, but before Kenneth, in the spring of 2002, they approached this man named Jimmy Covington, who was another homeless man, and they offered him the same deal that they offered Paul and Kenneth. And he initially said okay and took them up on the offer, but the fact that they wanted him to sign so much paperwork and give so much information, it kind of just made him uncomfortable, and he was just like, you know what, nah, I'll pass. And he could have potentially been another victim as well. It was also stated during the trial that between the two of them, they had gotten over $4 million in life insurance payouts between Paul and Kenneth. And in the end, both of them ended up being found guilty and sentenced to consecutive life sentences. So they're going to spend the rest of their lives in jail. But as y'all can imagine, this was like a media frenzy. And to this day, they are both considered the Black Widow murderers. But yeah, y'all, that is all I have for this case. Thank you all so very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you all in the next one. Y'all like my shirt? I like my shirt. And I don't, why am I so out of breath? Jesus. And in the media, they are both known as the Black Widow killers. Is they the Black Widow killers? What they call Black Widow murderers? Yeah.